Hello, this is Sarah Braasch, and this is my paper presentation, Modified Lewisian Hartian Convention, Account of Social Conventions, as the union of primary duty imposing social conventions and secondary power conferring social conventions. So thank you so much for watching. So I went ahead and decided, I have a PowerPoint in front of me, but I decided that it would probably just be more engaging if I just go ahead and you're seeing me rather than the PowerPoint. So I'm going to do that. And I'm just doing this off the cuff, so I know I have 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep a close eye on the time. So I'm going to start off by talking about how both David Lewis and HLA Hart are trying to capture an obligatory character of social conventions, and Hart actually speaks to the union of primary and secondary social rules because he wants to capture a real obligation to comply with the law, but he is actually speaking of Lewisian, as Margaret Gilbert coins them, social conventions. Is there or can there be a real obligation to comply with one's social conventions, particularly with respect to Lewis's and Hart's accounts thereof? The simple answer is no, but I'm far more interested in explaining why most people, most of the time, behave as if there were an obligation. I don't think that either Hart or Lewis are under any illusions regarding the fact that they both have only an individual instrumental rationality at their disposal. So how can we speak of obligation at all then, or maybe just normative character? So you have an obligation to comply with your social group's social conventions if the other members of your social group are in a position to demand such compliance and sanction you for non-compliance. But if we're only working with an individual instrumental rationality, then it doesn't seem that we can have a real obligation. Both Hart and Lewis seem to think that there can be something akin to a real obligation when there is a single rational thing to do in a situation that gives rise to a social convention, which is what everyone else in your social group is doing. But then social conventions, Lewisian social conventions, only arise in situations wherein everyone in a population is particularly motivated to align their beliefs and expectations with one another and to coordinate their behavior to achieve unanimity of conformity. And of course, the textbook example of a Lewisian social convention is driving on either the right or left-hand side of the road. We don't much care which side of the road we drive on, but we care a great deal that we all drive on the same side of the road. The worst possible outcome is for anyone to unilaterally deviate. And of course, this is because that would result in physical damage and death and injury. So we don't much care which side of the road we drive on, but we care an incredible amount that we all drive on the same side of the road. So we can understand why this would be a situation wherein there would be something very closely akin to a quasi-obligatory character of the Lewisian social convention of driving on the left or right-hand side of the road, because there's a single rational thing to do, which is what everyone else in your social group is doing. Okay, so with respect to a situation that gives rise to a Lewisian social convention, of course, as I just said, the worst possible outcome is a failure. Any failure to coordinate. Lewis allows for merely negligible deviation. No one wants anyone to deviate. Lewisian social conventions must pop into and out of existence instantaneously. They can neither evolve nor devolve over time, nor do they allow for disagreement or pluralism. This is the price that one must pay to capture this quasi-obligatory character of Lewisian social conventions. And this is the price that both David Lewis and HLA Hart choose to pay, because they both want to capture as closely as possible, something as closely akin as possible to a quasi-obligatory character of both the social conventions of one's social group and the social rules, legal rules of one's legal system of one's social group. So Ronald Dworkin, the natural law theorist, famously offers a withering critique of Hart's account of a legal system for just this reason. Because, of course, we have pre-theoretical intuitions that our social conventions wax and wane over time and throw a greater and lesser normative shadow across our lives, and we have pre-theoretical intuitions that we disagree about what the law is and what it should be, and that sub-social groups within a larger social group advocate for changes in the law, etc. So we know that social institutions, just as I just mentioned, evolve and devolve over time. People disagree about what the law is and should be, and despite this fluidity and pluralism, we still speak as if there were a real obligation to follow the law. Lewisian social conventions only capture one class of social conventions with the highest degree of conventionality and the strongest normative or quasi-obligatory character. There is so much that I think Lewis actually gets right about social conventions, including arbitrariness and common knowledge. But can we modify Lewis's account of social conventions to capture evolution, disagreement, and pluralism while also capturing something akin to normative or quasi-obligatory character? I think we can. I think we can explain both why people act and behave and speak as if there were a real obligation to comply with the social conventions of one's social group, as well as the legal rules of the legal system of one's social group. And I think we can also have an account of social conventions that takes account of the fact that our social conventions and our legal systems wax and wane over time. We disagree about what the law is and what it should be. So that's what we're going to do. So there's 3 steps to modify Lewis's and Hart's accounts of social conventions to do this. Step 1 is to adopt Margaret Gilbert's really astute insight that social conventions are social group constituting. The fact that a population has a social convention constitutes that population as a social group. Step 2 is to recognize the role that practical authority plays. Practical authority makes it known how everyone in the social group will behave. And ultimately, I am going to say that all social coordination requires practical authority. Step 3 is to recognize that all social conventions are step public social goods. Now, this is the case because the authority is going to be a free riding defector. So that is why the social group is going to rest upon an equilibrium point. There are going to be members of the social group who are parties to the social convention, and then there's going to be the authority or authorities of the social group who are the free riding defectors. This is going to be why the social group constituting social convention is a step public social good that rests upon an equilibrium point, and that and for that reason there's ultimately going to be a single rational thing to do for those parties to the convention, which is to continue to conform and maintain that step public social good. And while the free riding defectors, the authorities, they have no incentive to conform because they fare better by remaining free riding defectors, but because they are free riding defectors and they are the authorities of the social group, we're going to be able to maintain both common knowledge and arbitrariness, and they're going to be in a position to move the social group to alternate Lewisian social conventions. And this is going to account for both evolution and devolution of the social conventions and the legal systems of the social groups. So combining these 3 steps results in social group and sub-social group constituting social conventions or institutions that rest upon equilibrium points, but that can also evolve and devolve over time. Thus we have normative or a quasi-obligatory character, and we do not require unanimity. We have severed unanimity from this something closely akin to a normative or quasi-obligatory character, which is what Lewis and Hart both wanted. Okay, great. So the step 1 is that the social conventions are social group constituting. So I disagree with a great deal in Margaret Gilbert's account of social conventions, but I think her insight that social conventions are social group constituting is absolutely astute and brilliant. The fact that a population has a social convention constitutes that population as a social group for that reason alone, if for no other. This is really important for my account. When a population generates a social convention, the population generates a social group. So ultimately what I'm going to say is that the social group, which is constituted by the social convention, is itself a step public social good. And the authority is the free writing defector, and the other members of the social group are party to the social convention, which is the social group itself, which is a step public social good. Okay, so I refer to Gilbert's account of social conventions, really social rules, as a paradigmatic, wholly normative account of social conventions. For her, the obligatory character of social conventions is the paramount essential feature, and she requires neither conformity nor expectation of conformity nor preference of conformity. Gilbert is actually highly critical of Lewisian social conventions, which she refers to as individualistic rather than holistic, and she argues that there can be no obligation to comply with Lewisian social conventions. Okay. So step 2 is the role that practical authority plays. So social coordination requires practical authority, not epistemic authority. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about practical authority. Now, I am also not speaking of legal authority or public authority or official authority. I want a really nominal sense of authority. Okay, I want a really nominal sense of authority. But I do employ, like, even the kind of authority, like, I believe in a conversation between 2 persons, someone assumes authority. That's the kind of authority I'm looking for. But I employ Raz's definition of authority as the power to alter the protected reasons of someone else. A protected reason is a first-order reason to do something and a second-order reason to stop considering any alternate actions. This is the case even for Lewisian social conventions because of the risk dominance of the status quo position. So no one is going to conform to an alternate Lewisian social convention unless she knows that her entire community is going to do likewise. The worst possible outcome is for anyone to fail to coordinate. Practical authority solves this problem because the authority makes it known how everyone in the social group will behave. The conferral of authority upon someone is a secondary social convention that piggybacks on the primary coordination problem. To avoid regress, authority is always assumed, then conferred out of necessity in order to solve the primary coordination problem. And recent empirical social psychological work actually I won't say confirms, but strongly suggests that I am correct on this point. So we have a situation where oftentimes social conventions remain unsolved, and it's because authority, being an incredibly useful tool, it doesn't grow on trees. So we need a risk-tolerant, long-term thinking person to step up to the plate, basically, because there's also going to be a cost for communicating. There's an immediate cost. It's actually not rational in the immediate future to step up to the plate and assume authority, to assert authority, because it might not be conferred. And also you're paying a cost and you don't know that you're going to reap that long-term benefit of becoming the authority of a social group and being able to move the social group to alternate Lewisian social conventions. Okay. And that's why sometimes, like, if authorities were so easy to come by, it would be a lot easier to solve coordination problems, and social groups wouldn't get stuck at less optimal Lewisian social conventions, which we know that they often do. No one is really terribly happy about being stuck where they're at, but they just have trouble moving to that more optimal Lewisian social convention because they don't have an authority that steps up to the plate to make that happen. So step 3 is that social conventions and social groups are step public social goods. So just like I just mentioned, an authority is a foresighted, risk-tolerant individual. Authorities do not always arise in populations even when we need them. Sometimes coordination problems go unsolved. When an authority does arise, it is because someone was able to see that it was in her long-term interest to communicate an instruction to a population at a cost in order to reap the position of being an authority in a social group. Someone who is a free-riding defector and not actually a party to the social convention, leaving her open to moving the social group to alternate social conventions. This is why social conventions are step public social goods. The social group rests upon an equilibrium point immediately upon generating the social group via the social group constituting social convention. There is a single rational thing for the parties to the social convention to do, which is to continue to conform. The authority has no incentive to do anything other than continue to defect. This is why, as I mentioned, we can have this normative quasi-obligatory character without demanding unanimity at every point in time. So it is at least rational, if not obligatory, to affirm your social identity by continuing to confer power upon your authorities in your social group. And ultimately, this is going to be something that I'm going to use to explain that, say, Trump voters are actually being rational. I know it's sort of popular nowadays to say that they're acting against their own self-interest, their own best interest, but they really aren't doing that. And I think that this new account of social conventions explains that. Okay, now that we have an account of social conventions that recognizes that social conventions are social group constituting step public social goods, wherein the social group is itself a social good generated, even if there are others, including free-riding defector authorities with the power to move the social group amongst alternate social conventions, providing arbitrariness and common knowledge, we can have normative, obligatory character without unanimity. There's a single rational thing to do: continue to conform to the social convention if you are a party thereto. If we have normative, obligatory character without unanimity, we can have social groups and sub-social groups evolving and devolving over time, growing and subsiding along with disagreement and pluralism. And then I have just a little bit of time left, and the last thing that I want to talk about is that, so David Lewis has a very specific definition and convention, which is his rational choice-based game theoretic account of social conventions. So what I'm doing is I'm combining that with Hart's account of a legal system, which is the union of the primary duty imposing social conventions of obligation and the secondary power conferring social convention of authority. And so what I'm saying is that actually a social convention is in and of itself a union of these two different types of social conventions. And ultimately, I'm actually going to use that to solve a problem that Hart has in the concept of law respecting his legal positivist account of legal systems, where he actually ends up alienating the general population, the citizenry, from their own legal system in order to capture this quasi-obligatory character of law. Okay, I'm done. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, bye.